What's going on, everyone? It's another episode of the WVSports.com podcast. I am Wesley Shoemaker, as always, with the one and only Keenan Cummings. So, Keenan, it is Monday, February 24th, and we are in the same predicament with this men's basketball team that we were in about a week ago. West Virginia went 1-1 last week. They got the win that they really needed to have, and they looked somewhat destined to possibly get a win in the game they didn't need to win, and then they ended up getting just completely blown off the floor in the second half against Texas Tech. This team now comes back home on Tuesday night for what is another must-win, can't-lose type of situation as the bubble starts to kind of show itself, and in a year that the bubble doesn't seem to be that deep is the year that West Virginia finds themselves teetering with that bubble.
Yeah, that's one thing that's going to help them. The bubble this year is downright abysmal, really. I mean, we'll see how many bid stealers there end up being once conference tournaments get underway. But right now, I mean, Darren DeVries talked today, and he said, as of today, we're in the tournament. Obviously they got more work to do, but I 100% agree with him. I think if the season ended today, West Virginia's in the tournament. I think it's a matter of just kind of closing strong. You mentioned this is a must win. If you don't win this, you got to find a way to win on the road. So I think at worst, West Virginia's got to win 2 of these next 4. You would like to get 3 of 4, but 2 of 4, you're still very much in the conversation. You have 2 home games in that stretch, so basic math tells you if you win 2 at home, still 1 on the road, you're definitely going to be in. But still, like, you look at West Virginia's metrics, they still look pretty good. I think they're 48th in the net as of today, 5-9 in quad 1 games. Still don't have a quad 3 or 4 loss. I think they now have more quad 2 wins than losses. So it's gone up and down a little bit, but it's a strong resume. You look at the teams they've beaten. Now, not all of them are ranked now, but they've beaten a lot of good teams this year and don't have any bad losses. And that's kind of, I guess, what the bubble was made for, in a sense. If you're feeling a little bubbly, West Virginia would be a solid pick, because you look at some of those other teams that are down there with them, even teams that has a head-to-head win like Pitt. Look at some of the losses they have. They have some brutal losses. So I think it's hard to penalize a team for losing to good teams, especially when they're able to beat quite a few of those. But none of this matters, Wes. None of this matters if they don't close the season somewhat relatively strong. You have 4 games left. I'm thinking 2 probably gets them in, just with the way the bubble's going right now. But 3, I think you feel very confident.
Yeah, and I think 3, you feel even more confident because that would mean you go and split that Utah trip somehow, some way, most likely. Or, I mean, I guess you could lose to TCU and then win 2 in Utah, but you would get a quad 1 win if you get 3, because 2 of your final 4 games, the 2 road games out in Utah and against BYU, are quad 1 games. And so that is a big deal. And a bigger deal is that you can't suffer the bad loss. That is what UCF would be, that UCF game to end the season. You can't lose that game
Or
because that is
TCU,
a
really.
quad 3 game. Yeah, this one, no matter what, likely if West Virginia wins, this drops to a quad 3 win, just because TCU is 74th in the net and that home game cutoff is 75 to be a quad 2 game. And so it's likely this is kind of considered a quad 3 game if you want to think about it that way. But you have to have this one, but also just in terms of getting the wins, right? Like, once you're in those teen numbers, you start to kind of look deeper. That magnifying glass starts to be used on these resumes, compared to if you see a 19 or a 20, it's more of a, we're just going to stamp it and keep it rolling. But they're still in the tournament. Bracket Matrix still had them on a good side. I think they had them as the highest 10 seed as of today. That's a good thing. The net wasn't too mean to them after their loss to Texas Tech, which, when you lose by a lot of points, that's when it starts to get dicey. Best case scenario for West Virginia is a win by like 15 points or something tomorrow night, just because that would do a lot of good for their computers. And in a state of college basketball where the computers are so heavily relied upon, that is something that you have to take into consideration. It's like if you're in a little tournament, like an intramural basketball tournament. And it's like, how many points can you beat this team by? Well, we're going to keep pressing because we want to get the higher seed. It's kind of like that. Just we want to keep the foot on the gas because point of victory, margin of victory matters.
Yeah, and West Virginia has some incentive in this game, Wes. You go back and look what happened at the beginning of the month. That was a game that West Virginia led by double digits on the road at TCU. And then much like what you saw happen against Texas Tech, things just come unraveled at the seams before halftime. I think it was a 12-point lead with around 6 minutes left in the first half. And by the time halftime was around, West Virginia was clinging to a 1-point lead. Second half, they got blitzed early, fell behind by double digits, made a valiant comeback. Wasn't enough. Big story, big talking point from that game. West Virginia did a poor job. They were able to let TCU get to the rim a lot, and that led to a lot of fouls. TCU shot 18 more free throws than West Virginia and made 20 of 23. Some of those were ticky-tacky calls. Some of them were West Virginia getting lazy, reaching, doing things that they're not supposed to do. And, Darren DeVries has said it all season. This team they come and go with their defense. Since the injuries, especially to Tucker, the offense, you never know what you're going to get. It's one game, you might get guys hitting shots everywhere. The next game, guys can't buy a bucket. Where they have really been, for the most part, consistent, at least consistent to the point where you really notice it when they're not playing well, is on defense. And I think that's going to be critical for West Virginia. Again, that's the one thing that this team can control. You can get open shots. Even look at that Texas Tech game. How many open shots did they miss, Wes? I mean, just open shots.
Especially from three. Like I think there was a stretch where there was like 12 or something combined threes between the first half and second half that they missed. And a lot of them were Javon gets doubled, kicks out to the wing, and it's an open look, and they just didn't cash it in.
Yeah, I mean, and I have no problem with those shots. I mean, if you take open shots, you want to have confidence, but some days you're going to miss those. Defensively, you can control things. Now, you can't control the whistle and how the game's called and some of that stuff, but you can adjust to it. And I think that's going to be critical for West Virginia. They're going to have to do a much better job defensively, not let TCU get downhill, get behind them, and create problems, because that's when they've really struggled defensively. I think Texas Tech was a little bit of a different animal just because of what they can do in the post. But most of the times this year, that's when they've struggled, when they've allowed teams to kind of play with numbers. And West Virginia's got to have to avoid that, because this is a winnable game. I mean, it's right there for the taking. TCU is not going to let you have it. I mean, they battled Cincinnati the other day. I watched some of that game before West Virginia tipped off, and that was close at times. I know Cincinnati stretched it out, but TCU played really poorly to start that game, and then we're right back in it. So this is a team that, while they're further down the pecking order, they're still technically alive for NCAA hopes. They're not that far off. This would be a quad one win for them. They've already beat West Virginia once. We've talked about Cincinnati a lot, adding that second check mark to your resume. So there's a lot going for both sides of this. And, of course, there's always the Jamie Dixon back at West Virginia angle, which I know it's a different place, different time, but for all those nostalgic fans out there, that always has a little bit more fun to it.
Yeah, TCU the first time around, I think it was between points in the paint and free throws, that's 48 points they had out of their 65. And so that is a big, yeah. That's something that you're circling if you're Darren DeVries and company, because that means they're getting to the rim, they're either getting fouled or they're making the shot, and that's problematic. One thing I will say though, I mean, over the last two games, Amani Hansberry's played really well. Like, there's a lot to like with what we've seen from him. I think he had a double-double in both games last week. That second half he had against Cincinnati was really impressive, especially after his slow start. But on to the TCU point, too, there's more to this than also just the TCU opponent. I mean, this TCU team's playing good basketball. They've won 5 of their last 7, dating back to the game before they played West Virginia the first time. So they've had a really good month of February, and they're playing well. And they're coming off of a tough loss, as you said, against Cincinnati. And there's also Big 12 tournament seeding implications. And I know that there's probably – if you're West Virginia, you might want to slip into that 9 seed and get the extra win possibility on your resume against a worser or lesser opponent. But TCU is only one game ahead of West Virginia in the Big 12 standings, and who knows how it shakes out over the next 4 games. But once again, a win or a loss could go a long way in determining where you are playing when you go to Kansas City.
Yeah, and look at this. Look at the schedule left. I mean, I don't think any game in this league is a gimme. I think we can all establish that. I don't think the Big 12 is the best basketball conference in college basketball this year, but I think it's very, very good. But if you would have told West Virginia most years the 4 teams left, you'd be feeling pretty good about that. There's no Iowa State on there. There's no Texas Tech,
No Kansas.
Yeah, no Kansas. I mean, now granted, BYU is playing very well right now.
Oh, BYU looks like a top 4 team in the league right now.
Yeah, they're ever since that. I don't know what it is about teams figuring it out when they play West Virginia, but they've been on a tear since that West Virginia game. But I think that you look at. I think West Virginia is going to be favored in maybe 3 of these 4, definitely 2 of the 4, and.
KenPom gives them a 78% chance to win against TCU, 24 against BYU, a 47, so basically a toss-up against Utah, and then a 77% chance back at home. So they're kind of saying you're favored to win 2 of them, 1 you're not, and then 1's basically a toss-up in terms of you don't know what's going to happen. So that's pretty good odds in terms of where you want to be when you need a win.
Yeah, and it really does come down to that now. You've gotten – a lot of resume kind of building wins throughout the season. Not as many as you'd like. There's a few that got away from you, but you've got at least 5 quad 1 wins right now. And obviously that number could grow down the stretch. Now it's just about compiling wins because you're not getting in with 16, 17 wins. I just don't see any way that happens. I think you're going to have to get at least 18. I think you get to 18 and 13. I was more iffy on that before. You look at some of the teams that are in that bubble range with West Virginia, they keep losing too. So, I mean, I'm not – I think 18 and 13 probably get you in right now. Now you got to go to Kansas City and not drop a game to, Colorado or wherever you would play. But,
beat Baylor.
Yeah, they did. And that was strange.
Yeah, team rankings, they continue to update their NCAA tournament probabilities. West Virginia right now overall has a 64.8% chance to make the dance. But if they get to 18 wins, they've got a 31% chance to make it. And then 19, they're at a 73% chance to make it. So, I mean, that 18 number, I feel like a couple weeks ago, Keenan was at 15 or 20 in that range.
It was definitely down there. I think it was 16% or something.
Yeah, it's starting to inflate itself just based off of how everything else around college basketball is going. But there's certainly there's a path to victory. There's a path to March Madness. I mean,
there's a path to just making none of this matter. Win 3 or 4.
Yeah. If you win 3 or 4, you're in. If you win 2 or 4, go get 1 win in Kansas City. I think most people can sleep comfortably heading into Selection Sunday.
Yeah, and it's crazy, Wes. You think about it, felt like this basketball season just started.
I feel like yesterday was those Bahamas games over Thanksgiving, and now all of a sudden we're staring down March.
Yeah,
but
I think that either way, regardless of what unfolds over these 4 games, I do think that the luster is kind of wore off a little bit in the eyes of some, just given the way things have unfolded after that Iowa State win. But I got to give Darren DeVries a ton of credit with what he's been able to work with and how he's been able to still win some games. He got dealt kind of a tough hand, this year, and really is impressed. I am excited, to see how this thing progresses, how it continues to build.
Yeah, I know he likely won't win it, but he deserves to be in Big 12 Coach of the Year conversation for sure. And I would assume Javon Small makes the first team in this conference. If he doesn't, I would say that's somewhat criminal. But this conference is deep. It's not as top loaded as the SEC is, or maybe even the Big 10. But if you want to go match up each team 1 through 15, 16, whatever it is, in most other conferences, the Big 12 would certainly win a lot more of those games in the bottom half of that bracket, which I think says a lot about where the league is.
I think when you look at the leagues, it's definitely most years I would argue the Big 12, but SEC is just on a different level.
The SEC is different right now. Yeah,
they're just on a different level this year. But the Big 12 is the next league. You look, all but one of their teams is in the top 100 in the net. The only league that I saw, now I didn't do a thorough Sherlock Holmes type research on this, but I saw the SEC actually, they have all 16 of their teams, and I think the lowest one is 89th. But a lot of that's
Yeah,
inflated because
South Carolina is 89,
you're
and
playing so many good teams.
they have all but 2 teams that are in the top 51.
Yeah, I
Which
was looking
is
at the
just absurd.
ACC, and I think it was 9 of the top 18 because they have 18 teams are in the top 100, and the Big 12 has 15, and the 16th team is like 101 or something like that. So I think that it's pretty impressive, and really it speaks to it's coach speak. Everybody says they play in a good league. Everybody says their league's hard, but there's some added value to that when the numbers back it up.
For sure. But kind of a little bit of a topic switch up because we are talking about March Madness, and with the word March comes the word spring, and with the word spring comes the word football. Spring football. It is back. It is here. It gets going tomorrow, February 25th, or today, February 25th, depending on when you are listening to this. And Rich Rodriguez met with the media for the first time since he was introduced last week. Also, Zach Alley was introduced. But Keenan, we'll do this little exercise of what you're looking forward to, or a couple things to look out for this spring. I'll go first here. I just want to see the pace that everything goes at, right? Like we hear so much about Rich's pace. We hear so much about the high level of intensity. You heard about it from both Ali and Rodriguez last week. I want to see that kind of difference in practice, that switch that goes on once practice starts. That's what I'm curious to see. And then as far as on-field stuff, I mean, it's hard not to go to the quarterbacks. I feel like that's a kind of a cop-out, but there's a lot of people in that room, and there's obviously not a guy like we had this time last year. And so I'm interested to see how that develops throughout the spring. I mean, obviously then into the summer and fall.
Yeah, I think that obviously quarterback's one you got to mention. Offensive line for me, I want to see how that comes together. Who's playing where? Do they even have enough bodies that can play? Because I mean, that's a clean sweep, man. I mean, you lost not only your top 5 guys, you lost your top 2 backups. So it's going to be kind of tough there to see what they've got. How they addressed it heavily in the portal. But, like we've saw with West Virginia in the defensive backfield before, that's no guarantee. So We'll see how that looks. Other positions like wide receiver, who's going to step up, who's going to be filling roles. I think that there's so much newness to it, so much excitement that you're not going to be trying hard to find storylines. I thought it was really interesting the other day talking with Zach Alley. Just, I asked him about his defense. Is it scheme based? Do you match it to your personnel? And he kind of made it clear that, there's some scheme element to it, but they're so multiple that they take what their personnel does well and kind of mesh it in there. They can do a lot of different looks, a lot of different variations, 3 down front, 4 down front, play 2 safeties and 2 corners sometimes 3 safeties, sometimes a nickel, sometimes 3 linebackers. So, and the thing that stuck out the most to me, and I thought this was wild, but just kind of cool in a sense that, their defense can look different depending on the matchup from game to game. And I'm not sure that I've ever covered a group like that necessarily. Now we'll see how much that actually happens. Spring is when everybody is optimistic and talking. And
everyone's saying they're going to have 8 different offenses, 3 quarterbacks playing. Yeah.
We'll see how it comes to fruition. But I think that is exciting. And the thing that I've taken away just by, what I know about Zach and kind of his history is they force the issue. They're aggressive. So I think that the fan base is going to be excited to see that style of defense that really kind of plays to their personnel, has the ability to adapt to kind of what they're seeing, and then also forces the issue at the same time.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that's one of the big things that you're going to see on both sides of the ball too, is that you're going to see that, I mean, I think intensity is the wrong word, but that high motor, if you want to say, like, we're going to try and get after you both offensively and defensively, and you have to stop us, rather than the more conservative approach that you might have seen at times last year of we're going to kind of have that game control mindset on offense, not try and put the ball in strenuous situations, rush 3, rush 4 here. And I think it's going to kind of be a complete 180 in terms of that. One thing to note too, I know we haven't talked about this. Chad Scott, he did leave. He is no longer at West Virginia. He took the running backs role at Texas. Probably hard to say no to Texas money. My guess.
Yeah, and really, I mean, it helps West Virginia in a lot of ways. You get that $725,000 off the books.
Yeah,
You don't want to lose a coach like Chad Scott. He's a good guy. He's a good coach. But you get that off the books. That what you were paying a running backs coach because he used to be your offensive coordinator, and you also get a buyout from Texas. I believe it's 25%. So you get some money back. And now the question for me becomes: we know Chad Scott's gone. That's all kind of buried. When is the replacement made? Is this something that they want to have in place in the next couple of days? Will it take a week or two? Will they wait out the duration of the spring while other people fill in and coach the position? I think that's going to be an interesting dynamic because how many times were we kind of thankful that the staff shuffle finally seemed like it was over? And
yeah,
I guess when you have 20-some staff members, you're going to have a lot of turtle shell game going on. But that's the question I have now. How long does this process take? And I thought it was interesting that Rich kind of just flat out addressed it, said that Chad was leaving and, he's had a lot of calls with agents and coaches that are excited about the opening. So by that, I read in it won't take that long. And I think it's important. Obviously they got to be there by the summer, and I don't think that's a question, but I think it's important to kind of build some rapport, in the spring with new guys. So I expect it'll be in the next, week or two, but who knows?
Also, on that note of staffing in general, it'll be interesting how the staff comes together. This is their first kind of elongated football stuff together, right? And so there's a lot of guys who used to be with Rich at previous stops, but there's also just a lot of guys from a bunch of places. And that's obviously a dynamic that takes time too, of figuring out how each other works. Like I think that's kind of the overwhelming theme of figuring each other out, whether that be from, Rich even said he's still learning names, right? So
Yeah.
That's the thing, that it's just figuring each other out, figuring out chemistry, figuring out how everyone goes. There's a lot of moving parts to this car, and they're trying to move this car as fast as they can, but they also have to realize that not all parts are going to fit in the assembly line at the exact right point.
Yeah, and a lot of movement, as you mentioned. I'm kind of excited to see some familiar faces too. Guys that I haven't seen since either they were playing or maybe their last tenure coaching here, and some new faces. So it'll be exciting. Spring football is always exciting just because there's no pressure. There's not that kind of overarching, I don't want to say doom, but almost you're looking forward to the season. So like fall camp at times isn't necessarily, even though it is more important to fans, you're kind of already looking ahead. Spring, it's the focus, especially if your basketball team's struggling. Fortunately for West Virginia, that's not the case. But
yeah, this time last year, spring football was the savior because of
yes,
the mess that was.
Yes, but it's going to be exciting, and I think that we'll learn a lot. I think that this week we get Rich 3 times. I assume there'll be some open practice opportunities as well after that. So we'll get a look at these guys, kind of see how the new transfers are fitting in, all the new pieces, and go from there.
The new transfers, you mean like the entire team? No.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, like 40 guys, whatever.
Yeah. But no, you got anything to add, or you want to wrap us up?
New president. West Virginia does have a new president. I feel like
new
we should.
President. Yeah. From Coastal Carolina, right?
Yep. I think that, we don't dive too much into it, but, Michael Benson from Coastal Carolina, I think that of the candidates that were kind of floated out there, I guess, that's probably the more optimistic one for me, at least. I think that it's going to be a good hire. He did some really good things down there. So West Virginia's got a new president. It feels like that process took forever, but
out of those 3 names that I think have been kind of rumored around as in terms of who were the 3 finalists, I feel like he seems to be the most upsided choice, like the most potential upside.
And he gets athletics.
Yes, that was my next sentence was going to be, is that he understands the importance of athletics, and there seems to be that people have said when talking about him, hey, athletics is an important part of the university as well. And I think you can kind of see that historically with the school, especially like WVU, of when you have success in football and men's basketball, that kind of seems to drive attendance in terms of how big your freshman class is. But that's kind of across the country too, as enrollment is very dependent at some of these bigger schools on field success of sports.
Yeah, that'll be one of the first things we'll probably have to address is enrollment. So good luck,
Yeah.
and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah,
I'm
we cover the
optimistic.
sports side of things, right?
Yes, I am optimistic. I do like the hire on the surface.
Yep. But until then, we will get out of here. It is going to be a late night at the Coliseum. I wonder what that crowd will look like. Tomorrow night, Tuesday night, 9 o'clock, CBS Sports Network, I believe it is. And then football starts tomorrow. So we will have a ton on the website, on the Blue App to talk about. And it'll keep coming because you get Rich Rodriguez a couple times. You're going to have a couple hoops games this week. You're going to have more bubble talk. So we'll keep
And the
coming.
dead
Baseball.
period ends.
Yeah, and the
The
dead
pretty
period
dead
ends.
period ends. So we'll have
And
visitors.
then baseball is still undefeated, knock on wood, I guess, for them. They're winning right now, I believe, 3-2 late in their last game. Their home opener is Wednesday, so that'll be good for them to return home to the freezing. Is it good? Is it cold there, Keenan?
Still, it is colder. Well, it's
Mm-hmm.
not as cold as it was. It was like
Yeah. Well, last week
absolutely,
it was like 12 degrees.
but it's supposed to get
Yeah.
really cold again moving towards the weekend. So I think it's Thursday is when it's supposed to start getting cold again because we're stuck in an eternal winter.
Yeah, but that'll do it for this episode of the WVSports.com podcast. I'm Wesley Shoemaker, joined by Keenan Cummings, hoping the eternal winter is ending soon. And this is the WestVirginiaSports.com podcast.